Hello, my name is Shadia Nasrallah. I'm an energy correspondent for Reuters news agency, and I specialize on the coverage of corporate oil and climate policy and where those two worlds intersect. We're very pleased to welcome today Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who is Minister of State for Energy, Clean Growth and Climate Change in the British government. Thank you very much for taking the time today, Anne-Marie. You're also the UK International Champion on Adaptation and Resilience at the upcoming COP26 climate extravaganza planned for November in Glasgow. So it's a big year, of course, in your portfolio. Previously, Anne-Marie was the Anne-Marie was the Secretary of State for International Development. So it's great to have you here for global perspective beyond the UK as well.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's kick off with a view to COP26, which is planned in November in Glasgow. Very easy question to start with. Do you think it's going to happen in person or will it be an online conference?
So no, we're absolutely committed to making it happen in person. In fact, CPD Alok Sharma, my colleague who is the president designate for the presidency, is very clear that we are doing everything, working very closely with the Scottish Government to make sure that it can be in person, so that obviously the local community has all the appropriate health and safety in place, and that as many as possible can gather with us. I think we've seen over the last year, it's been really, really difficult, particularly for developing countries, working on a virtual basis through negotiations. So we're absolutely determined to make sure that everyone can be in the same room, as it were.
And from the British perspective, what would be the minimum that would need to happen for you to consider it a successful meeting?
So success at COP26 will require all countries coming to Glasgow really prepared to commit to action, which is going to help limit the global warming rise to 1.5 degrees C. Commit to solutions that enable communities and natural habitats to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Because, you know, even if we manage to stop our CO2 emissions today, adaptation is still going to be required for many, many communities as a result of the temperature increases anyway, and really to commit to work together to deliver action. So we're going to be using, obviously, the G7 just coming up this week, G20 and a number of COP-convened ministerial meetings to continue shoring up those ambitious commitments from countries. And Glasgow is going to be the culmination of all this work and the finalising of the agreement the world came together to make in Paris back in 2015.
And if I could go into a bit more detail on the areas that you would like to see the world focus on at COP26, for example, one area where there's still outstanding questions is functioning global carbon market. Mm-hmm. Is there a specific aim that you would like to see, or a new charter to be signed, or a new mechanism to be designed at this meeting in November?
So the key focus, and we saw it, CPD was hosting the G7 climate ministerial just last week, in fact 2 weeks ago, and there was a really, really clear set of agreements came out of that, and the key one was about phasing out international fossil fuel finance. And I think if we can embed that, and that becomes, you know, that first, if you like, major action point agreed by everyone, that helps substantially towards helping us all keep to 1.5 degrees. So the complexity of all the other negotiations are ongoing and are led very ably by CPD and his team of negotiators to keep the UNFCCC process moving. But I think there's some key punchy things like, you know, fossil fuel finance, which will help to really shift the dial and help countries to move to that next generation of green growth.
Can you unpack that a little for a broader audience? Obviously, we're talking about technical things like export finance, etc. what this decision doesn't mean is that it would be illegal, say, for an energy company to invest in fossil fuel projects. I was wondering if you could unpack this recent decision a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. So from a UK perspective, specifically, because we have already made a commitment at the end of March, we implemented what is a world-leading policy to no longer provide any, so for government to no longer provide any new direct financial promotional support for the fossil fuel energy sector overseas, other than where there might be humanitarian, crisis needs and that sort of thing, and to align all our kind of UK investment support to enable clean energy exports. So we, having set that into our own legislation, we are now working to get commitments from like-minded partners, and it was fantastic to see the G7 climate ministerial come on board with that and make that commitment too. And we will obviously be continuing to encourage others to do the same, because that's the if you like, the first stage. We want UK investments to help those countries to grow their clean energy resources so that they can build growth for their countries and their citizens on the back of clean energy, not of dirty coal.
And given that we're now talking about the future of investment in fossil fuels, now the UK has made this decision in terms of government funding for fossil fuel projects abroad. The IEA, the report on a net zero transition scenario, the report by the International Energy Agency, which is an organization which functions as a sort of think tank and data provider to mainly Western governments to help them design their energy policies. They published a very interesting report a couple of weeks ago on how the world can reach net zero emissions by 2050. And one of the main points was that in their scenario, there would be no new oil and gas projects sanctioned beyond this year. Now, obviously, the UK, for example, is still issuing new licenses, and it's still legal for energy companies to sanction or decide to invest in new fossil fuel projects beyond this year. How has this report impacted on Britain's thinking about its own regulatory framework and new fossil fuel projects in the UK beyond this year?
So, of course, as we progress towards net zero on this journey that we're all on, oil and gas must and will play a smaller role in meeting the UK's energy demand, because we are already seeing regularly more than 50% of our electricity supply coming from renewable resources, and we will, as we build a greater low carbon energy system, we will go more and more in that. So oil and gas in due course will shrink. But as reflected in fact in all the Climate Change Committee projections, it's going to continue to be an important part of our energy mix for some time. The IEA report itself acknowledges that continued investment in existing sources of hydrocarbons is going to be required to meet the world's energy demands on that pathway to net zero. So we're supporting the industry to transition to clean energy through our transformational North Sea transition deal, which we published a few weeks ago, and we've shifted our international support to clean energy and away from fossil fuels, as we discussed. And we've been very clear that in terms of new licensing, so we aren't issuing any new licenses this year, but we are not saying absolutely never. If there was a very good case and there was a strong evidence base behind it, then we continue to say at this point that we will be willing to consider new licensing, because I think as a government we have to make sure that we can ensure security of supply and a stable transition. So we've set a very clear line of sight that we want to see an orderly transition away from oil and gas, but accepting that we do still need it for some time to come. And actually the oil and gas sector have been incredibly forward-leaning in this, and they've agreed to meet really stringent reductions in their own emissions. And that, they're a vital partner in this energy transition, because we need them to deliver this. I can't do it as a politician. I'm the one, asking them, providing the framework for them to be able to make the change. But the North Sea transition deal is going to create conditions for new green industries to base themselves in the UK. and also to create new, really high-value employment opportunities, which is very exciting, and future-proofing those existing businesses as they transition to a greener economy for their own business, and really secure long-term viability of jobs across our industrial heartlands, where what would have been 30 years oil and gas will in future be offshore wind, CCUS, probably hydrogen. So there's it's these energy companies are absolutely critical to transitioning. So we need to make sure that they can do so safely and in a financially secure way.
Am I reading too much into it, or did you imply that for future licensing rounds, it will be harder than in the past for a company to gain new licensing rounds in the British North Sea?
Yes, we were very clear. When we published the North Sea Transition Deal, at the same time we published our new licensing regime, which very clearly says that in order to succeed in getting a license, there would have to be a very strong evidence base. And we are working with industry and many specialists at the moment to set out exactly what that framework will look like, which we'll publish by the end of the year. But we're very clear, absolutely, this is business as usual is no longer the case in this industry, and the sector is very much working with and alongside us to move towards clean energy sector of the future.
And will the UK use the G7 platform, the COP26 platform, to urge other nations to stop issuing new licenses and curtail new investment in new oil and gas projects? So,
as a sovereign nation ourselves, we absolutely support the sovereign right of another country to exploit the oil and gas within its territorial boundaries. It's not for us to dictate that, but we're working very closely with other governments, with international organizations, and with the private sector to support reliable, affordable and clean energy globally. And we really want to support economic growth and poverty reduction by helping those developing countries to establish secure and sustainable energy supplies, simultaneously delivering on climate and environmental objectives. So driving towards that clean energy growth that I talk about. So, we the UK government, since the end of March, have stopped providing new direct financial support for fossil fuel energy sector overseas. But it's for other countries to determine when they might want to set a new path and say we know that our security of supply can be strong and secure, moving away from oil and gas. And that's what we all want to achieve. The UK, we're on a journey to do that too. It can't be done overnight, but we will encourage others to do that too.
What would you say then to people who've looked at the IEA report, given that it is an agency that has traditionally had much influence on the developed world's energy policy, and say, well, this report says that there should be no new oil and gas projects beyond this year, and then there isn't any steps from the legislative side to actually translate that into regulation and policy? What would you say to that?
So, the purity of the report is excellent, but the reality in practice for countries is about ensuring security of supply so that their citizens and their businesses can continue to work and grow successfully. So, we're going to be stepping up, as we have been, our offer to work with countries to unlock their, massive renewable energy potential. And in doing that, then they can pursue cleaner alternatives away from fossil fuels and reap the rewards that brings. And that, of course, is where we will see countries able to, feel they can, in due course, step away from using oil and gas as alternatives come into play. And, through our COP26 Energy Transition Council, that's a lot of the work that we're doing with partner countries around the world to help, others to see how they can make that transition.
On another play. A Dutch court recently ruled in favor of climate activists to force Royal Dutch Shell to cut its emissions more rapidly. Do you think forcing fossil fuel suppliers to cut their emissions through courts and by dint of courts is the right way to tackle the energy transition?
So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment directly because I understand that there may be further legal proceedings, and obviously I wouldn't wish to comment on that particular case. But I think what I say is, as we're building back better and greener, which is our challenge since the devastating impacts of the pandemic last year, we as the UK have clearly signalled to the oil and gas industry that business as usual just is no longer an option. And as I say, the sector has genuinely committed to reducing its production emissions and transforming the UK continental shelf into a net zero basin by 2050. And we've done that, working absolutely hand in glove with all of them through the North Sea transition deal, which was agreed, so that we can really see that progress. The deal as it stands will achieve a 60 megaton reduction in UK greenhouse gas emissions, including 15 megatons through the progressive decarbonisation of UK production through to 2030 to help get to a net zero basin by 2050. So, that transition, the word transition is really important here because these things, require technological change and investment, but that commitment from UK continental shelf-based oil and gas sector companies has been really impressive.
You say ideally part of that transition should talk about the emissions that occur at the end use of the fuels produced. There's a very ambitious plan for the production, but more than 80% of the emissions from those fuels happen at the end of at the car when you burn the fuel in your car.
Well, absolutely.
It's currently not covered by the plan.
And of course, well, not within the North Sea transition deal, but we are tackling that part of our overall, UK emissions reductions targets through the work that we're doing, led by the Department for Transport on net zero emission vehicles. So we have legislated for no new cars built, fossil fuel cars from 2030 and vans from 2030 onwards, and indeed from 2035 not hybrid either. So we are moving at pace in the UK, and again, in a world leading way to really drive a shift in that energy use. So what of course it will do is, if you and I aren't filling up our car with petrol anymore, we'll be filling it up with electricity. That's the right terminology. Plugging it in, and in doing that, we will need to see an increase in our energy supply, as indeed the oil supply goes down. So that's your counterweight. And of course, what we are, working at pace to ensure is that we have clean electricity coming from wind and solar and from nuclear as we move to that net zero emissions vehicles world. And there's some really interesting work going on with heavy goods vehicles, looking at hydrogen as the fuel. So again, moving to transition. So and in all those sources of usage of energy, moving away from the oil-based requirement, clearly the oil requirement comes down dramatically. So it's we're building up one so that the other can shrink, but always coming back to the fact that a security of supply is a really, really important part of this, because we don't want to have cliff edges on the way through.
I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.